In this video, we're going to talk about Unit 7, Target 1C, graphing the solutions of a quadratic function. Target 1C specifically talks about understanding and using vertex form to graph a quadratic function. Vertex form is written as y equals a times the quantity x minus h squared plus k. We call this vertex form because you can easily find the vertex from this form. Much easier than you can find the vertex from general form, which we learned about in our last video. I can tell an equation is in vertex form because it has parentheses. Parentheses are those distinguishing marks that make vertex form and general form distinguish them from each other. So keep that in mind once we start to mix up the problems later on. So because this is vertex form, we are really going to be focusing on the vertex here. Remember, the vertex is the highest or the lowest point in a graph. So for this first example, we can see that the vertex is located right here, that low point on the graph. That ordered pair is -3, -5. Now we have to decide, is A positive or negative? For this particular graph, A is positive because the graph opens up. Positive, up. The graph is pointing up and makes a smiley face, a positive face. The next example here, the example in the middle. Our vertex is located right over here. That ordered pair is 4, 5. This time the graph opens down, so A is negative because the graph opens down or makes a frowny face. Now it's your turn. Go ahead and pause the video and try this third example. When you're ready, hit play and see how you did. So hopefully you got that the vertex was -2, 4, and that A is negative because the graph opens down. Now that we've looked a little bit closer at the vertex here, let's go ahead and actually dive into the form a little bit more. You saw this form on one of the previous slides, but what do each one of these letters mean? Let's start with A. The A value tells us which way the graph opens. We kind of hinted at that on the previous page. If A is positive, the graph opens up, like this little parabola here shows you. And if A is negative, the graph opens down. Now, in algebra this year, we are just scratching the surface on what these letters mean. I do want to let you guys know, though, that you will be learning more about this when you get to AAT. So I'm going to let you know what these do, but don't worry about it if it doesn't make sense because they will give you more information when you get to AAT. But A not only tells us which way the graph opens, but the A value also determines how fat or how skinny the graph is. You will see this in the different examples, but you will learn more about how and why that works when you get over to AAT. Next, the H value. The H value helps us to figure out the X value of the vertex. In AAT, you will learn that the H value also moves the graph to the left and to the right. And then last but not least, the K value. K helps us to figure out the Y value of the vertex. It moves the graph up and down. Now, vertex form is the form that so many students like to graph in because there's actually no work to calculate the vertex. The vertex is located at h, k. If you know what your h and your k value are, you know what your vertex is, making your table very easy to make, and there's no work to actually find the vertex itself. The one thing you need to be careful of is this minus sign in the formula. This minus sign in the parentheses actually means opposite. So whatever value you have in the parentheses, you need to take the opposite of it, and we'll really make sure we focus on that throughout this lesson. So now that we've really taken a moment to look at vertex form, let's actually begin to do some graphing. So we have our first example here. The directions say to graph the solutions of the quadratic function and then list the characteristics of the parabola. The good news is the characteristics are the same no matter if you are in vertex form or in general form. So we're good there. We just need to focus on getting the vertex, making our table, and getting our graph. So the very first thing I like to do is I like to list out my A, my H, and my K. In the case of this problem, the A value is 1, the H value is 3, and the K value is 0. Notice in the parentheses we have a -3. We took the opposite of that for our H value to get positive 3. Once you hit A, H, and K, you can figure out the vertex. Remember, the vertex is H comma K or 3 comma 0. And we put that vertex always in the middle of our table. Once we have our vertex, then we can fill out the rest of the table. The two x values that are bigger than 3 are smaller than 3, going this way, are 2 and 1. And then we want the bigger values going down, so the bigger values would be 4 and 5. In order to get the y values or the f of x values, we're going to plug those values into our calculator. And when we plug those into our calculator, we're going to get 4 and 1 for 1 and 2, and then 1 and 4 as you see in the table. Once you get all 5 ordered pairs, you can go ahead and graph the parabola. Next, you're going to list out the characteristics just like you've been doing. So go ahead and pause the video and see how you did, and try these out, and then come back and see how you did in a moment. So hopefully your characteristics look like this. Some things that students have been making mistakes on are the range. Make sure you read range from bottom to top. So the first thing you encounter for the range is this vertex. That y value is 0. And then these arrows are pointing up towards positive infinity. So you have that 0, positive infinity. The number always gets the bracket. And the infinity symbol always gets the parenthesis. The other characteristic that can throw students sometimes is the y-intercept. No matter the form, in order to get the y-intercept, all you have to do is go back to the original problem and plug in 0. I know some of you figured out a shortcut in general form, but that shortcut only works for general form, so you do have to plug in that value and do some number crunching. So one problem down, let's see how the next one goes. So, just like the last problem, let's go ahead and start out by listing our A, H, and K values. So why don't you try that? What are our A, H, and K values for this particular problem? Hopefully you got A is -1, H is 0, and K is 4. This problem doesn't have any parentheses, and H always falls into the parentheses, so that's why H is 0 and K is 4. Sometimes students can mix those up, so be careful. Once you get your A, H, and K, we know that our vertex is H comma K or 0 comma 4. Next, we're going to fill out the x values. Remember, the two smaller x values go above, the two bigger x values go below. Sometimes students struggle to get these. Don't be afraid to pull out an electronic number line to help you. Having a number line handy can make getting these x values much easier. Once you get the x values, go ahead and plug them in to get y. When you do, you get the following y values, 0 and 3. 4 you already had from your original problem, and then 3 and 0. Next, we're going to go ahead and graph the parabola. This parabola is opening down, which makes sense. We have an a value of -1. Therefore, the graph should be opening down or making a frowny face. And then last but not least, we need our characteristics. Characteristics are like this. Again, with the range, just be careful. Make sure that you're grabbing the y value of the range, and the y value of the vertex for the range, and that value has a bracket on it. Other than that, hopefully these characteristics are getting better and better for you. 2 down, 2 to go. So let's see the next problem here. This next problem, why don't you pause the video here and see if you can get your table. So start out by getting your A, H, and K and fill in your table. So go ahead and pause the video and come back after you've completed your table. So pause the video now. Okay, let's see how you did. The A, H, and K values are this. A is 2, H is +1, and K is -2. That makes your vertex 1, -2. And then the rest of your table looks like this. Your first ordered pair is -1, 6, followed by 0, 0, the vertex of 1, -2. The fourth ordered pair is 2, 0, and lastly 3, 6. We can go ahead and plot those points, connect the dots, and make our parabola. Last but not least, we have a bunch of characteristics. Feel free to pause the video to test your knowledge on those characteristics, or you can go ahead and copy those down. Now, one thing to point out about this graph before we move on. You may notice that this graph looks a little bit skinnier than the other two graphs that we've completed. That's because of this A value. And again, you'll learn more about that when you get over to AAT, but I just wanted to point out that yes, this graph is skinnier because of that A value. One more problem. And this particular problem has a fraction in it, but I promise you we will get through it together. We're going to want to get our A, H, and K just like we have been. A is negative 1/2, H is negative 2, and K is negative 3. H and K make up your vertex of negative 2 and negative 3. But this fraction makes filling in your table a little bit different. Normally students say negative 3, negative 4 for these two values. But because of this fraction, we want to actually be counting our x values by 2. That 2 is the denominator of this fraction. So instead of negative 4 and negative 3, I'm going to actually do negative 4 and negative 6 for my x values because I want to count by 2's. That would make the last two x values 0 and 2. Again, we only do this because a is a fraction. It doesn't happen often, but we want to try to avoid having to graph decimals here, and that can be very challenging. So take my warning, and whenever you see a fraction, make sure your x values are being counted by that denominator. Next, we're going to get the ordered pairs. Now, sometimes students see these ordered pairs, and these aren't the correct ordered pairs, by the way, the negative 11, negative 5, and negative 11. But sometimes students freak out because they see this negative 11. It doesn't fit on the grid. Every once in a while that happens. You only are going to have to graph the ordered pairs that fit. So in this particular case, we only graph 3 ordered pairs. Still fill out a complete table. That's important. But just graph what fits on the grid. Now, if you have this happening a lot, something's going wrong, but every once in a while, it's okay to have a graph that does not completely fit on the grid. So now that we've made our graph, we're going to go ahead and get our characteristics here. This particular graph, because it starts below the x-axis and opens down, doesn't have any x-intercepts or zeros, but we've seen that before, so hopefully that's not anything new. This is our last example of graphing in vertex form. Now you guys are ready to go ahead and complete the worksheet. Please do not hesitate to reach out to Mrs. Newman or I if you need any help. Hopefully this video was informative and you guys do well on your worksheet. Thanks for watching.